What if a single act of kindness spoken in a foreign tongue was all it took to change the course of a man's life forever? A struggling, single dad didn't mean to stand out. But one morning, at a busy farmer's market, his quiet gift caught the attention of someone powerful, someone who wasn't supposed to notice. Before we dive into this heartfelt journey of connection, courage, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the soul. Now, let's begin. Single dad spoke fluent Spanish to help a farmer. Unaware, the woman behind him owned the market. The slap of a clipboard hitting concrete sliced through the morning buzz of the farmer's market. "Senor, I told you no permit, no table. Move it!" The market manager barked, voice cutting across the rows of colorful produce like a blade. A few heads turned. Most didn't. Drama wasn't rare here. But Jack Moreno stopped. He was crouched by a stack of crates, sweat staining the collar of his shirt muscles, taut from a morning of lifting boxes for vendors who barely noticed him. The voice had caught him mid-motion, mid-life, it seemed. He stood slowly, brushing off his hands as he turned. The man being berated was old, weather-worn. His leathery hands clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Fresh peaches, 3 for $2. His eyes darted between the manager and his table of unsold fruit like a boy about to lose his last toy. "I need 2 more days," the old man pleaded in broken English. "Just 2. "My papers, they come soon." The manager snorted. 2 days, 2 weeks, it's the same story every time. No license, no spot. Pack it up. Jack's jaw clenched. He glanced down the row of vendors. No one intervened. A few muttered in Spanish, a few in English. No one moved. He looked over his shoulder across the way to where his daughter Emma sat cross-legged on an overturned crate, a well-loved book balanced in her lap. She was watching, wide-eyed, expectant, waiting. He exhaled and stepped forward. "Señor, por favor," Jack said calmly, switching to flawless Spanish. "Déjeme hablar con usted un momento." "Sir, please. Let me speak with you a moment." The manager turned, startled. "You speak Spanish now." Jack didn't answer him. He crouched beside the old man instead, asking gently, "¿Tiene usted algún documento que podamos mostrar por ahora?" "Una carta, una solicitud en proceso." "Do you have any document we can show for now?" "A letter, an application in progress." The old man blinked. "Sí, tengo una carta de la oficina. Está en mi coche." Jack stood. "Give him 5 minutes. He has a letter from the permit office. You'll have your proof." The manager hesitated, glancing at Jack's plain work shirt, his calloused hands. "Who even are you?" Jack didn't flinch. Someone who remembers what dignity sounds like. There was a pause. Then the manager sighed and waved a dismissive hand. "Fine. 5 minutes. If I don't see it, he's out." Jack nodded, already helping the old man gather his things. The tension slowly faded, absorbed by the hum of the market resuming its rhythm. From behind a stall of lavender soaps, Clara Evans watched with narrowed eyes. She hadn't meant to get pulled into anything this morning. She was supposed to observe, take notes, decide if the churning wheels of her corporation should level this place or preserve it. No one knew who she was. That was the point. But something about the way Jack spoke, not just the words, but the weight behind them, held her still. It wasn't just fluency. It was authenticity, and it didn't come from textbooks. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket and opened the market's vendor log. Jack's name wasn't listed. He wasn't a seller, just staff, a mover, a body. But she'd seen something more. Dad Emma's voice called, snapping Jack back. She held up a water bottle. "You forgot this." He took it with a grin. "What would I do without my assistant? You'd probably pass out." She smiled and he laughed, ruffling her curls. Clara watched this too, the softness in his eyes, the way he listened to his daughter like every word mattered. Then came the real twist. The old man returned minutes later waving a folded letter. The permit office had in fact approved his application. It just hadn't arrived in time. The manager grumbled, but let him stay. Jack didn't linger for thanks. He simply returned to hauling boxes like he hadn't just changed the course of someone's day, like it wasn't a big deal, but Clara knew better. She saw the way the old man's hands shook as he set his peaches back in place. She saw the tears behind his grateful smile. That wasn't just a favor. That was a lifeline. Clara slipped her phone back into her pocket, heart thudding faster than expected. She had come here searching for economic data, community receptiveness, real estate valuation. But now she had something else, someone else to factor in. As Jack stacked boxes beside a stall, she walked past, slow and steady. She didn't speak, just let her eyes meet his, gave the smallest of nods. Jack frowned slightly, recognition flickering, though he didn't know why. She disappeared into the crowd like a whisper. That night, Clara pulled up Jack Moreno's name on her laptop. There wasn't much, no LinkedIn, no social media. But she found an old university bulletin from UC Berkeley, a language fellowship award. Then a public school staff photo from years ago. Mr. Moreno, Spanish language program. And then nothing. A gap, a void. She closed the screen slowly, her own reflection staring back at her. There was a story here, and she was going to find it. But she had no idea that by uncovering his, she would start rewriting her own. The first time Clara Evans had set foot in the Del Paso Farmers Market, it had been as a child. Her mother had brought her every Sunday carrying cloth bags filled with oranges, beans, and homemade soap. The smells back then, cilantro, warm tortillas, damp earth had sunk into her memory like perfume clings to a scarf. But Clara didn't smell anything today. She was too focused. Dressed in jeans, a loose tan blouse, and a sun hat that concealed most of her face, she moved among the vendors with quiet purpose. Her assistant had offered to arrange an official tour with the market committee, but she declined. Clara didn't trust curated introductions. She preferred the truth, and truth didn't wear badges or suits. This market was slated for acquisition, another name on a long list of underutilized properties that her company Solvita Foods had been targeting for rebranding. Clean up the vendors' install uniform stalls, regulate the permits, and make everything sleek, safe, and marketable. Until that morning, it had sounded like progress. Logical. Efficient. But then she'd seen him. The man who stepped forward to defend an aging farmer like it was second nature. The man who didn't raise his voice, who didn't posture, but whose words carried weight. And not just because he spoke Spanish like a native. There was history in his tone, familiarity, respect. Clara hadn't planned to interfere, but she'd watched closely because something in Jack Moreno's voice reminded her of her mother. The same quiet command, the same warmth buried beneath principle, and that made her stay longer than intended. Now, as she passed a vendor selling homemade cheese, she asked the woman behind the table casually, "Who's the guy with the crates and the little girl who reads a lot?" The woman squinted past Clara's hat, then grinned. "That's Jack. He's a regular. Doesn't own a stall, just helps folks lift stuff. Real strong, real polite. His girl's Emma. Smart as a whip. Does he work for the market?" "Technically, no. He picks up shifts, does favors. No one pays him much. He just shows up." The woman leaned in. "But if you need something done." "Right," asked Jack. Clara smiled, murmured her thanks, and walked on. She passed Emma, sitting with a sketchpad now, drawing something in the corner of her book, two hands clasped, one large one small. The child had that inward look some kids had, as if she carried a world inside her head, too big to speak aloud. Clara knew that look. She'd worn it once. At home that night, Clara sat in her reading room, a glass of Pinot beside her, and read the personnel proposal for the Del Paso project again. It called for a full vendor replacement strategy. Remove undocumented or non-licensed sellers, implement vendor uniforms, increase rental fees to encourage premium partnerships. In theory, it made sense, but in practice, she pictured the old man with the peach sign. She saw Jack stepping between two worlds with a language most executives didn't even hear, let alone speak. What struck her most wasn't the Spanish. It was the dignity. Jack hadn't done it to show off. He hadn't tried to win praise. He simply acted because it was right. Clara flipped her laptop open again and typed Jack Moreno plus UC Berkeley. An old academic archive surfaced Jack R. Moreno, recipient Applied Linguistics Fellowship. Further down, a faded school staff photo, Elk Grove Unified School District. Bilingual coordinator. And then, nothing. The trail vanished. It was as if he'd stepped off the professional grid altogether. Clara leaned back in her chair, troubled more than she expected. That kind of resume didn't just disappear unless something personal had happened, something that made a man walk away from recognition and salary and step into the shadows of manual labor. She didn't like mysteries she couldn't solve. And yet, some part of her hesitated. Not from suspicion, from respect. She wasn't entitled to know Jack's story, but it had become clear if she went forward with her company's original plan, men like Jack would vanish from the market, pushed out by formality and regulation that left no space for nuance or character, and she wasn't sure she could live with that. The next morning, Clara returned to the market, not to observe, not to hide. She brought coffee. Jack was adjusting crates outside a honey stand when she approached. Emma wasn't with him today. Clara stopped a few feet away and held out a cup. "Black no sugar," she said. "You look like someone who doesn't believe in sweetness before noon." Jack turned, startled. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You've been watching me," he said, not accusing, just observant. "I've been watching everything," Clara replied. "But yes, especially you." Jack hesitated, wiped his hands on a towel, and accepted the coffee. "I don't usually get attention unless something breaks," he said. "Something broke," Clara said softly. "The way that farmer looked at you yesterday, like you'd held him together." Jack didn't reply right away. Instead, he took a sip, then glanced at her sideways. "You're not just here for groceries, are you?" "No," she admitted. "I'm Clara." He nodded once. Jack. They stood in silence, the clamor of the market filling the spaces between them. Clara took a breath, made a decision. "I'm involved with a company interested in redeveloping this space," she said. "We're looking at community assets, real value, and what you did yesterday, that's not nothing." Jack set his cup down gently. "People here don't need redeveloping," he said. "They need space, respect, a little time, and leadership," Clara said. Jack looked at her long and deep. "I used to lead," he said finally. "Now I show up where I'm needed. Then maybe it's time to lead again." The moment stretched. Then a child's voice called out, "Dad." Emma came running, holding up a hand-drawn flyer for a storytelling event. "Can we go next week?" There's a girl reading poems in Spanish. Jack smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We'll be front row." Clara watched them, father and daughter. Words and silence. Rooted real good. This place wasn't just a market. It was a language. One only a few people still remembered how to speak. And maybe she could learn it too. Jack Moreno kept his mornings quiet. It was the only time the world didn't feel like it demanded more than he had to give. Every day at 5:15 a.m., he made coffee-packed Emma's lunch and folded her sweater just the way she liked it, sleeves crossed, hood tucked in. Then he'd sit at the kitchen table, sipping slowly, letting the silence wrap around him like a threadbare quilt. But today, silence didn't settle. Not after Clara's words the day before. Then maybe it's time to lead again. She didn't know what she was asking. Jack looked across the kitchen at the dusty bookshelf in the corner. On the top shelf, half buried behind Emma's school trophies and an old ceramic pencil holder, sat a frame turned backward. He hesitated, then reached for it. The photo inside was sun-faded but clear enough. He stood next to a podium, hand resting on a stack of awards. A younger Jack, neatly trimmed beard, crisp tie, proud but tired eyes. The caption on the certificate read, "Outstanding Educator in Bilingual Education, California State Recognition." He hadn't touched that photo in years. Back then, he was Mr. Moreno to over 200 students. He ran bilingual immersion programs in underfunded districts, teaching kids to embrace both their heritage and a broader world. He believed deeply in what he did. But when Marisol, his wife, was rushed into emergency surgery during Emma's delivery, everything changed. Jack had arrived at the hospital breathless 20 minutes after the school bell rang. The doctor met him in the hallway. "I'm sorry," he'd said, voice quiet. "We did everything we could." Just like that, Jack's world went from lectures and lesson plans to pediatric inhalers, co-pays, and nap schedules. Emma had been born with underdeveloped lungs and fragile immunity. She spent her first year in and out of ERs. The school offered him a flexible schedule. The university even held his doctorate placement. But none of it mattered. He couldn't risk being unavailable, not even for a moment. He sold their house, moved closer to community clinics, took jobs that didn't require a tie or emotional bandwidth. What surprised him most wasn't the grief. It was how quickly the world forgot who he used to be. No one called anymore asking for speaking engagements. He stopped being Professor Moreno and became, "Hey, can you lift this box?" And that he accepted. It was the price of being there for Emma. But every so often, on quiet mornings like this, he missed the classroom. He missed being someone kids looked up to. He missed using his voice. That afternoon, Emma sat cross-legged on the living room rug, coloring a new flyer she made for her school's Cultural Heritage Week. She was drawing little flags and speech bubbles with hello written in different languages. Jack watched her from the kitchen doorway. "You know," she said, not looking up, "my teacher said I could talk about you during my presentation." He blinked. "Me?" "Yeah." She glanced at him. "Because you speak like 100 languages. And because you help people at the market." "That counts." Jack chuckled. "Not 100, maybe 4. And helping folks carry fruit doesn't exactly make me a hero." Emma looked up serious. "You're my hero." His throat tightened. "Mom would have thought so too," she added gently. There it was. That unexpected gravity kids sometimes dropped into the room without warning. Jack sat beside her. "Hey, you okay?" Emma shrugged, but her voice was softer. "I just miss her sometimes, even though I don't remember her." Jack wrapped an arm around her. "She would have been crazy about you," I know, Emma whispered. "Because you are." It was quiet for a moment. Then Jack said, almost to himself, "Do you think she'd want me to try again?" Emma tilted her head. "Try what he hesitated. To do more. Use what I know. Use my voice." Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out the drawing she'd been working on the night before. It showed a man holding a megaphone standing on crates with tiny people below cheering. A little girl stood next to him holding his hand. "I already drew you doing it," she said. Jack laughed, then blinked back unexpected tears. He cleared his throat. "Well then, I guess I'm outvoted." Later that evening, he pulled out his old laptop. The screen was cracked at the corner and it wheezed like it had asthma of its own, but it booted up. He searched for Del Paso Market Redevelopment Proposal. After a few clicks, he found a leaked draft from a local newspaper. Plans to commercialize, modernize, replace. The phrase that hit him hardest, eliminate informal personnel and optimize vendor diversity through standardization. That was corporate for people like you don't belong here anymore. Jack sat back, heart racing. The market had its flaws, he knew that. The permits were messy. The infrastructure was crumbling. But it was also one of the last places where people didn't need perfect English-polished resumes or six-figure budgets to survive. He didn't know exactly what Clara's role was, but if she was who he thought she was, then maybe, just maybe, she was asking for something real. The next morning, Jack arrived at the market earlier than usual. He helped Rosa unload her flower buckets, adjusted Manuel's uneven table legs, and picked up a bruised peach for breakfast. Then he saw her. Clara stood at the far end, speaking to a woman in a hijab and helping her stack handmade candles. She wore no makeup, no heels, just jeans and a shirt that somehow still looked elegant. When their eyes met, Clara offered a tentative wave. Jack nodded, and he walked toward her. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Because maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was time. To speak again, to lead again. To believe that even in silence, someone had been listening all along. The morning sun hadn't yet burned off the thin layer of fog hugging the edges of the Del Paso farmers' market. A soft, golden light filtered through the overhanging tree branches, casting long shadows across the sidewalk as Jack Moreno adjusted a stack of egg crates for Mrs. Vasquez. He had shown up earlier than usual, not because he had to, but because something inside him had shifted. Maybe it was the picture Emma drew. Maybe it was the way Clara looked at him the day before, like she saw something he'd almost forgotten was still there. Maybe it was just time. He didn't know what he was supposed to do next, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out. Clara wasn't there yet. He noticed, and tried not to notice that he noticed. Emma arrived with her backpack bouncing, wearing a mismatched outfit she'd picked out herself, a yellow t-shirt with a blue flannel tied around her waist leggings with cartoon books on them, and purple sneakers that lit up when she walked. She carried a manila envelope in one hand and an old clipboard in the other. "Dad," she said seriously, "I need 10 minutes of your time. It's for my project." Jack blinked. "Should I schedule an appointment?" Emma smirked and plopped down on an overturned crate. "Interview. Cultural Heritage Week. You're my subject." Jack sat across from her, resting his hands on his knees. "Fire away." Emma cleared her throat theatrically, then read from a crumpled paper. "What traditions from your culture have influenced your life the most?" Jack chuckled. "Well, that's a big question. Probably language. My mother insisted I learn Spanish and English side by side. She said words are bridges, not walls." Emma nodded solemnly. "Good quote. I'm writing that down." She scribbled, then looked up again. "Next. Have you ever helped someone using something from your culture?" Jack thought back to the peach vendor, to all the times he'd translated at clinics or helped write job applications for neighbors. "Yeah," he said softly. "A few times." Emma grinned. "You help people all the time, Dad." Before Jack could reply, a familiar voice called out behind him. "Is this the interview line I'd like to register?" Jack turned and saw Clara standing a few feet away, a paper bag in one hand, coffee in the other. Emma brightened. "Hi, you can be part 2 of my project." Clara knelt beside her. "Only if I get a gold star." "You get 3, Emma said without hesitation. Jack stood brushing his hands off on his jeans. "You're here early." Clara handed him the coffee. "And yet, you still beat me." They stood in a moment of easy silence before Clara looked toward Emma, then back to Jack. "Can I steal a few minutes?" she asked gently. Jack glanced at Emma, who gave him a sly smile and waved them off like a movie director. He followed Clara down one of the quieter aisles behind the flower stands where the buzz of morning transactions faded into birdsong and the distant rattle of delivery trucks. Clara turned to face him. "I meant what I said yesterday." Jack's expression stayed neutral, but his voice was warm. "You said a lot of things. I said you should lead again." He looked down at his boots, then up at her. "I'm not the person I used to be." "Good," she said softly, "because the person you are now is the one they need." Jack studied her, unsure of what to say. Clara continued, "I'm going to push back against the company's initial plan, but I can't do it alone. The board sees numbers. I need them to see people. You want me to be—" "What, a spokesperson?" he asked, half incredulous. "I want you to be yourself." "But louder." Jack hesitated. "I've spent years trying not to be noticed." "And yet, here you are," Clara said. "Still showing up, still helping everyone around you. People like that aren't invisible, Jack. They're just humble." He folded his arms, eyes thoughtful. "And you? Where do you fit into all this?" Clara looked away for a beat, then back at him. I'm the woman who nearly signed away a community without realizing what it meant. I came here to confirm a business deal. And then I met people who reminded me what it meant to care. Jack didn't answer, but something softened in his shoulders. Clara smiled gently. Besides, Emma already sees you as a leader. Why not just prove her right? That landed harder than she probably realized. Jack glanced back toward the market where Emma was now showing her drawing to Rosa, who clapped like she'd just seen a masterpiece. He sighed. I don't have a title. No credentials anymore. Clara shook her head. You have trust, respect, and a voice that makes people listen. He looked at her for a long moment as if weighing her words. Finally he said, Okay, I'll come to your meeting. Clara blinked. Seriously? He nodded, but on one condition. She tilted her head. What's that? You're not just attending as the executive in charge. You're showing up as Clara, the woman who brought coffee, helped the candle vendor stack her shelves, and knelt down to talk to my daughter. Clara exhaled something like gratitude washing over her features. Deal. As they walked back toward the main corridor of the market, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not pride, not anticipation. Alignment. Like something inside him had clicked back into place. He wasn't fully sure what lay ahead. But as Emma looked up from her drawing and waved her little face full of light and knowing, he realized something. Maybe you don't need to go back to who you were. Maybe you just need to show up as who you've become. And maybe that's enough to change everything. The meeting room above the local community center smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. Jack sat near the back, tapping a pen against his leg as murmurs filled the space. Folding chairs creaked under the shifting weight of small business owners, market vendors, and city liaisons. Most people looked tired. A few looked guarded. The walls were plastered with poster boards, proposed modernization plan, vendor application process, projected economic growth. All of it slick, polished, corporate. All of it felt foreign. Jack didn't belong here. He knew that. No name tag, no suit, no briefcase. He'd come anyway. Clara hadn't arrived yet. Jack exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure if he hoped she would walk in or hoped she wouldn't. Either way, he stayed. He owed it to Emma, to the people who called the market home, and maybe for once to himself. Downstairs, Clara stood in the lobby holding her breath. Her heels, a rare choice, clicked too loud on the tile floor. She wore a blazer, not because she liked it, but because today she wasn't just Clara. She was the executive face of Solvita Foods, a billion-dollar entity that didn't take kindly to human complications in their redevelopment models. She hated that phrase. Human complications. The truth was, she used to believe in numbers. Data made sense. It was clean, predictive, useful. But the past few weeks had unraveled that thinking like a thread pulled loose in a sweater. She'd watched Jack lift boxes, speak with dignity, raise a child with tenderness and wit. She'd listened to vendors who built livelihoods on stalls no wider than a closet, whose faces lit up when they spoke of regular customers, of neighbors of community. Clara wasn't here just to delay a decision. She was here to change it. She smoothed her blazer, walked up the stairs, and entered the room. Heads turned. Jack saw her and gave a slight nod. She returned it not as an executive, but as a witness. The meeting began with a presentation. A young man in a sharp blue suit clicked through slides about revenue projections, sanitation upgrades, vendor replacements, standardized product lines. He used words like efficiency streamlining, competitive edge. Clara watched the room carefully. No one raised their voice, but their silence was heavy, familiar. The kind of silence that comes when people know they aren't being seen. When the speaker asked for questions, no one moved. Until Jack stood up. He didn't step forward, didn't try to dominate the room. He just cleared his throat. I have a question, he said. His voice was calm, measured, but it carried. Everyone turned toward him. Jack continued. What happens to the vendor who doesn't speak English well enough to fill out a 3-page online application? The man in the suit hesitated. We'll have translation options. And if they don't have internet access, Jack asked again. There was a pause. Clara stood. She didn't ask permission. I think what Jack is asking, she said clearly, is whether these changes serve the people already here or just make room for a different kind of tenant. The room stirred. A few heads nodded. The man in the suit frowned. Ms. Evans, with all due respect, this plan was approved at the regional level, I know, Clara said, her tone still composed. But I helped write it, and I'm here to change it. Gasps. A few murmurs. One elderly vendor crossed herself. Jack blinked. That wasn't what he'd expected. Clara looked around. I spent the last few weeks walking this market, talking to the people, watching what works, what doesn't. There's room for improvement. Yes, but improvement doesn't have to mean erasure. She gestured to the posters. This plan talks about walls. I want to talk about windows, places where light gets in, where voices can be heard, where diversity isn't cleaned up, it's celebrated. Jack looked at her differently now. Like a wall he didn't realize he'd built had just cracked. Later, as the room cleared and small groups formed around the coffee table and sign-up sheets, Jack found Clara outside on the balcony. She'd kicked off her heels and stood barefoot against the railing, staring down at the street. The sun was dipping low, casting gold along the sidewalk. That was brave, Jack said. She didn't turn. It was overdue. Jack joined her at the railing. For a moment, neither spoke. You didn't have to come back, he said. Most people with power don't. Clara finally looked at him. I think I forgot what power is. He studied her, unsure of what he saw. There was elegance, yes, but also weariness, sincerity, and something else. Vulnerability, maybe. My mother used to bring me to that market, she said softly. I forgot how much it meant to her, until I met you, and Emma, and Rosa, and the man with the peaches. Jack smiled faintly. His name is Enrique. Of course it is, Clara said with a small laugh. They stood there in silence, watching the sky change. Then Clara asked quietly, Do you think they'll trust me now? Jack looked at her, really looked. Not at the CEO, not at the polished version. At the woman standing barefoot asking an honest question. I think they already do, he said. They just needed to hear it from the real you. That night back at home, Emma sat on the floor sorting through colored pencils. Dad, she asked, did you speak up today? Jack paused, recalling every heartbeat of that room. I did, he said. Emma looked up, hopeful. Was it scary? Terrifying? But you did it anyway. Yeah, he said. I did. Emma smiled, then pulled a folded paper from her backpack. Then, you're ready. For what? For Chapter 2, she said, handing him a flyer. It was for an upcoming community storytelling night at the market. Emma had signed him up to speak. Jack stared at the flyer, then at her. You're relentless. Emma shrugged. You're interesting. People should hear you. Jack shook his head with a quiet laugh, but his eyes were warm. Maybe walls could become windows after all. By the time Jack arrived at the evening stakeholder session, the fluorescent lights were already buzzing overhead like a nervous whisper. It was held in the back conference room of a local library, the kind of space that still smelled faintly of dry pages and old varnish. Jack had been invited, not summoned, but he could feel the tension in the air the moment he stepped inside. He was the only one not wearing business attire. Again. A flannel shirt and worn jeans made him look like he was there to fix the plumbing not talk policy. He carried no notepad, no printed proposal. Just a quiet presence and a memory full of stories. Clara was seated at the far end of the rectangular table, her expression unreadable but calm. She gave him a small nod. The only seat left open was beside her. As Jack walked the length of the room, he could feel eyes following him, measuring, weighing. At the head of the table sat a man in a steel-gray suit, sharp-featured and polished in a way Jack instinctively distrusted. Mr. Moreno, the man said, folding his hands. Glad you could make it. I'm Alan Crane, Vice President of Strategic Development for Solvita. Jack shook his hand. "Thanks for having me." Crane gave a smile too tight to be sincere. "We're here to listen, and we're here to move forward. Let's begin." The meeting opened with a formal agenda. Financial forecasts, maintenance plans, the usual corporate jargon scalability, compliance asset optimization. Jack followed what he could, but most of it sounded like they were talking about machines, not people. Then came the part Clara had warned him about. Crane introduced a revised streamlining model for the vendor ecosystem, cleaner, faster, more selective. Jack's heart dropped at the phrasing. More selective, it meant fewer booths, higher rents, English-only applications, erasure dressed in structure. Jack could feel Clara shift beside him. "I'd like to speak," he said, not loudly, but clearly. The room quieted. Crane tilted his head. "Of course, Mr. Moreno. We're all ears." Jack stood slowly. No notes, just his voice. "I want to ask a question," he began. "Not about projections or rental grids. Just one thing." He looked around the room, meeting each gaze. "What exactly are we saving?" he asked, "if we lose the soul of the place in the process?" Silence. He took a breath. "I know what it's like to lose something that can't be replaced. My wife died during childbirth. I gave up my career to raise our daughter, and I never regretted it. But I did lose part of myself. For a while." He let that hang in the air. No one interrupted. "This market, this little broken-down, messy, multilingual corner of the city gave me back pieces I thought I'd buried for good. The people here don't just sell fruit and flowers. They sell hope, memory, identity." Crane's fingers steepled in front of him. "Mr. Moreno, with all due respect, we understand the sentimental value. But sentiment doesn't sustain a long-term portfolio." Jack smiled faintly. Neither does arrogance. A few people sucked in breath, but Clara didn't flinch. In fact, a subtle glint of pride flashed in her eyes. Jack continued, "If we build over this place, we won't be creating something new. We'll be erasing what already works just because it doesn't look like what's on a spreadsheet." Crane leaned back, lips thin. "So, what do you propose?" "Chaos unregulated operations." Jack shook his head. "I propose adaptation, bilingual paperwork, training workshops, rental assistance for legacy vendors, a council made up of people who actually work there." Crane scoffed. "That's very democratic." "It's very human," Jack replied. When the meeting broke for a brief recess, Jack stepped into the hallway to clear his head. His palms were sweating. His heart pounded in a slow, heavy rhythm. He wasn't a speaker. He wasn't trained for this. But it felt right, like stretching a limb long asleep. A few minutes later, Clara joined him. "You handled that better than most politicians I know," she said. Jack let out a long breath. "I think I just challenged a VP to a moral duel." Clara smiled. "You didn't just challenge him. You shook him." Jack looked at her, searching. "Does it matter?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Yes, because you gave voice to what so many have wanted to say but didn't know how." Jack nodded, then asked what had been pressing on him since the meeting began. "Why did you change your mind?" "Clara." She looked at him, something unguarded, crossing her face. "I didn't change my mind," she said. "I remembered it." Jack waited. "My mom used to run a booth at that market. Handmade tortillas. Every Saturday. I'd sit under the table with a book while she counted change and greeted every customer by name. After she passed, I closed that part of my life, buried it beneath degrees and boardrooms." She looked away, then back. "You reminded me what it felt like to belong somewhere." Jack didn't know what to say, so he didn't. He just stood there beside her, shoulder to shoulder, in the quiet. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Jack stepped out to the porch. He looked up at the stars, those same distant pinpricks he and Marisol used to lie under, naming constellations they never remembered the next morning. He thought of Clara, of her voice in that room, of her bare feet on the balcony days earlier, of how she'd stood beside him today, not just physically but emotionally, morally. and of something else, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Hope, not the kind that comes easy, but the kind you fight for, the kind that only grows where truth has been spoken, the kind that builds not walls, but windows. The wind picked up that evening, sweeping through the market with the kind of chill that whispered warnings. Vendors tightened their tarps, shoppers moved quicker, and Jack felt it in his bones. Not just the cold, but something else, a weight he couldn't name. He had barely slept the night before. After the meeting with the executives, he had gone home wired, his mind refusing to quiet. Clara's story about her mother had replayed in his head like a forgotten melody. He'd looked at old photos, reread Emma's drawing captions, and tried to picture what came next. But instead of clarity, he found fear. Real, paralyzing fear. It wasn't stage fright or anxiety. It was the deep, raw kind that comes from knowing you might step into something bigger than you and fail. The next morning started with gray skies and silence. Emma was unusually quiet as they walked to school. Her backpack jostled with every step, her boots squeaked slightly on the wet sidewalk, but she didn't chatter like usual. Jack noticed. "Everything okay, kiddo?" She glanced up, hesitant. "You're going to that storytelling night at the market, right?" He smiled faintly. "I said I would." Emma stopped. "You have to." He crouched to meet her eyes. "Why is this so important to you?" She swallowed. "Because I talk about you all the time, at school, to my friends, even to my teacher. I always say, my dad helps people. My dad used to be a teacher. My dad speaks Spanish better than the Spanish teacher." He laughed. That's a low bar, but she didn't laugh back. Her voice trembled. "I need them to see what I mean." Jack's heart clenched. "I will," he said softly. "I promise." She nodded, eyes shining. "Okay." But even after she turned and ran to join her classmates, Jack stayed crouched on the sidewalk, hands on his knees, breathing like he'd just finished a marathon. Later that afternoon, Clara texted him, "Meeting with city officials moved to next week. Great work yesterday. Proud of you." Jack stared at the message longer than he should have. The words "proud of you" hit differently when they came from someone who didn't have to say them. He replied with a simple, "Thanks. Talk soon." Her answer came seconds later. "Definitely." And, "Jack, don't forget to show up tonight. People need to hear you. I need to hear you." But as the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the streets in hues of amber and rust, Jack stood frozen in his living room. His shirt was ironed. Emma had laid out his notes on the kitchen table. The market's storytelling event had already started. But Jack hadn't moved. He stared at the door, at the handle, at the choice. What if his voice cracked? What if he forgot his words? What if he made a fool of himself and, worse, disappointed Emma? He thought of Clara's confidence in him, of Crane's cold stare across the boardroom, of the vendors who had leaned in when he spoke. What if they were all wrong? A sharp coughing sound broke his spiral. From the hallway, he heard it again, harsh, rattling. "Emma," he called. He rushed into her room. She was curled in bed, a blanket up to her chin, eyes wide and watery. I can't catch my breath," she whispered. Jack's heart exploded in his chest. He darted to the dresser, yanked open the drawer, empty. The inhaler. "Where is it?" Emma shook her head, panicked. "I thought it was in my backpack." He grabbed his keys and coat. "Come on. We're going to urgent care." Rain had started. Jack's car sputtered to life, and he drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping Emma's hand. Her breathing was shallow, tight, but she squeezed back hard, and that small act of courage gutted him. At the clinic, they took her in immediately. Oxygen, albuterol warmth. A nurse patted Jack's shoulder and said, "She'll be okay." "You got here fast." He nodded, barely able to speak. He sat by Emma's bedside for nearly an hour, watching the monitor beep steadily, her chest rise and fall more easily now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He leaned in. "For what I didn't mean to scare you." Jack blinked hard. "Hey, it's my job to be scared. It means I love you." She smiled faintly. "Did you miss the storytelling?" He nodded. "I did." She looked up at him. "But you showed up for me." And that was when it hit him. All this time he thought the stage was the moment that mattered. But this being here when it counted, when someone needed him, even when it cost him something, this was the real story. When they got home, it was late. Emma was tucked in her breathing, slow and steady, a soft plush owl clutched in one hand. Jack stood in the hallway, the night quiet around him. Then a knock at the door. He opened it to find Clara standing there in the rain, holding a paper bag and a thermos. "Is she okay?" she asked immediately. He nodded. "We're back from the clinic. Just now." Clara exhaled. "I waited for you. At the market." He looked down. "I was going to come." But then she reached out, resting a hand lightly on his arm. "You made the right choice." "I broke my promise." "No," she said. "You kept your real one." They stood there in silence, the rain a soft percussion around them. "I brought you some of the tamales Rosa made for the event," Clara said. "And some tea." Jack accepted the bag. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "They saved a spot for you, if you ever want to tell your story." Jack smiled, exhausted but genuine. "Maybe next week." Clara turned to go, then paused. "By the way, your daughter gave me a copy of her school project. The part about you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "She did." Clara's voice softened. She said, "My dad is made of quiet strength, the kind you don't always hear, but you always feel." Jack closed his eyes and let the words settle. Not every voice has to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes it just has to be there when it matters most. The day of the community town hall dawned crisp and clear, as if the sky itself had taken sides. Jack stood at the kitchen sink staring out the window while the kettle boiled behind him. Emma was still sleeping, curled like a kitten beneath her favorite quilt. He'd promised Clara and himself that he would speak today. For real this time. No backing out, no detours, no emergencies to hide behind. Still, his hands trembled as he reached for his mug. This wasn't fear of public speaking. Not anymore. It was the weight of responsibility. Because this time his voice mattered. And not just to the people in the room, but to the vendors who couldn't speak the language, to the grandmother who sold tamales from a folding chair, to the young boy who helped his mother sell flowers before school. He wasn't just speaking as Jack Moreno, the man who once taught language. He was speaking as a man who remembered what silence had cost him and what stepping forward could restore. By mid-afternoon, the community center buzzed with life. Folding chairs filled the multipurpose room, and rows of string lights dangled from the low ceiling like hopes hanging on thin wire. People stood in clumps, whispering nervously or sipping coffee from styrofoam cups. A few reporters lingered in the back, notepad ready. At the front of the room, a small stage had been set up with a single microphone. A hand-painted banner above it read, "Voices of Del Paso. A town hall for the people." Jack stepped inside and spotted Clara immediately. She stood near the podium, clipboard in hand, speaking with a woman from the city's redevelopment office. Her dark blue dress contrasted the warmth in her eyes when they met his. "You came," she said. "I said I would." She smiled. "Emma's here too. She's sitting front row. Looks like she brought half her class." Jack's eyebrows lifted. "Should I be nervous?" "You already are." They shared a laugh. It felt easy, natural in a way Jack hadn't felt with another adult in a long time. Not since Marisol. Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They're going to listen." "Jack, but speak like no one's in the room but Emma." He nodded, swallowing the tightness in his throat. "I can do that." The event began with Clara introducing the purpose of the gathering to hear directly from those who would be most affected by the proposed redevelopment. One by one, vendors came up nervous but brave. Rosa told a story about how her flower stand had funded her son's college tuition. Manuel shared how his produce stall had been passed down through 3 generations. A teenage girl spoke softly about translating for her mother every time inspectors came. Each story was a thread weaving together something bigger than any one voice. Then Clara stepped up again, and now she said a voice I think we've all come to trust. A man who's not just part of this market, but part of what it stands for. She turned, met Jack's eyes, and stepped aside. The room stilled. Jack climbed the steps to the stage, his heart hammering. For a moment, the microphone loomed like a mountain. Then he took a breath and began. "My name is Jack Moreno," he said, "and I'm not a vendor. I don't run a booth or sell handmade soap. I don't have a logo or business cards. I carry crates. I translate when someone's scared. I walk my daughter past these stalls every week." He paused. "But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk about what happens when voices are lost." He told them about the day Enrique almost lost his stand because he couldn't explain a permit delay, about Rosa trying to fill out digital paperwork on a phone with a cracked screen, about the boy who translated adult conversations without knowing the weight of the words. And then he said, "Every time we ask someone to speak a language they don't know, navigate a system they don't understand, or follow rules written by people who've never looked them in the eye, we are not improving a system. We are building walls disguised as order." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I used to be a teacher," Jack continued. "Language was my life. But when my wife died and I had to raise my daughter alone, I stopped using my voice. For a long time, I thought silence was survival." He looked out over the crowd at Emma, who sat wide-eyed between her friends. "But my daughter taught me something. That silence doesn't protect you. It only hides you. And when we hide, we let other people tell our stories." He stepped forward slightly. "So today, I'm using my voice. Not because I want attention, but because I believe the people in this room, this market, deserve to be heard before they're erased." The silence was thick. Then someone began to clap, then another, and another, until the room filled with a swelling, thunderous applause. Jack stepped back, overwhelmed but steady. Clara met him at the foot of the stage, her eyes shimmering. She didn't say a word, just reached for his hand. He let her take it. That night, after the applause faded and the chairs were stacked away, Jack and Emma walked through the quiet market under starlight. "You were amazing," Emma said, practically bouncing. "I thought I might pass out." "You didn't." "No," he said, "I didn't." They passed Rosa's stand, now empty, and Jack paused. "I didn't do this alone," he said. Emma looked up. "No, but it wouldn't have happened without you." He smiled. "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't knowing what to say. It's believing you still have the right to say it." Emma thought for a second. "I think you found it again." Jack looked out over the place he had once only carried boxes through, now the place where he had found himself. Not every story starts with confidence. Some start with a whisper, and if we're lucky, they grow loud enough to be heard. The storm rolled in slowly, disguised at first as a thin curtain of mist that settled across rooftops and market tents. But by mid-afternoon, the rain thickened, turning gutters into streams and umbrellas into necessities. Jack stood at the rear of Rosa's booth, tying down a corner tarp with thick rope. His shoulders soaked his breath, fogging in the chill. He hadn't meant to stay this long, but he couldn't leave Rosa alone in this weather, not when her tent was wobbling like a birdcage in a wind tunnel. "Senor Jack, she called you're going to catch pneumonia." Jack laughed, water running off his hood. "Then at least I'll be well ventilated." Rosa rolled her eyes. "Go home. We'll be fine." Jack gave the rope one last tug. "I'll leave once I know the tent won't take flight and land in Sacramento." He turned to go, but not before Rosa stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You spoke for all of us this week," she said. "You reminded them that we exist. I won't forget that." Jack smiled, a little embarrassed. "Thank you. I just said what needed to be said." "No," Rosa replied firmly. "You said what we couldn't." By the time Jack returned to his car, his jacket was soaked through. He stripped it off in the front seat, cranked the heat, and called Emma. It rang once, then again. No answer. He frowned. Checked the clock. 4:46 p.m. She usually texted him when she got home. Always. He tried again. Nothing. A flash of unease curled through his chest. The house was dim when Jack arrived, porch light off front curtains still drawn. Inside, it was quiet. "Emma," he called. No answer. He dropped his keys, his voice louder now. "Emma." Then a cough. From the hallway. He turned the corner and found her curled in a ball at the foot of her bed, her cheeks pale, her breath wheezing. Panic slammed into him. He knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, hey. You with me?" Emma nodded faintly. "It hurts," she whispered. Jack's mind spun into action. He reached into the drawer where he kept her emergency inhaler, but it wasn't there. He checked her school bag. Nothing. "Where's the backup?" Emma shook her head weakly. "I forgot. I left it in Ms. Carter's room after PE. Jack didn't wait. He scooped her into his arms, blankets and all, and rushed to the car, the cold rain hammering down as if it too were frantic. The drive to the clinic was a blur of red lights and windshield wipers. Jack talked to her the whole way, gently, steadily, like they were just going for ice cream. "You're doing great. Just a little longer, baby. Keep your eyes open." "Okay," Emma nodded, a slight rasp in her breath. "You're not mad." He swallowed. "Never, Emma." When they arrived, the staff moved quickly. Oxygen, a nebulizer, the familiar murmur of controlled concern. Jack stood back, hands shaking, trying not to crumble in the corner of the exam room. This wasn't the first time, but that didn't make it any easier. Hours later, Emma lay sleeping beneath a warm blanket, her color returning, her breathing steady and slow. The clinic room was quiet now, just the soft hum of machines and the occasional distant voice from the hallway. Jack sat beside her, hands clasped, head bowed. And that's when the door opened. Clara stood there holding 2 cups of coffee and a bag of crackers. "I saw the porch light was off," she said quietly. "I knew something wasn't right." Jack stood startled. "How did you—" "I was going to stop by after the storm," she said, "to check on the market. And maybe check on you." She looked at Emma, then at him. "Is she okay?" Jack nodded slowly. "She's stable now." Clara set the coffee down and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small plastic inhaler. "I keep one in my glove box," she said, "just in case." Jack took it, staring at her words, failing. "You remembered," he said softly. Clara sat in the chair across from him. "Of course I did." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is why you hesitated, isn't it? The meetings, the speeches. You were afraid that if you stepped too far into the world again, you might miss something that mattered more." Jack looked at Emma. Then he nodded. "I already failed once," he said. "When she was a baby. I didn't get there in time. I promised myself I'd never do that again." "You didn't fail," Clara said gently. "You built a life around her. And you've shown up for her every single day." He met her eyes. "It still doesn't feel like enough." Clara shook her head. "That's what good parents always think." She paused, then added, "But you don't have to choose Jack. Between making a difference for others and being there for her. You're doing both. And she sees it." Jack leaned back, his shoulders sinking. The rain still tapped at the clinic windows, but the storm inside him had started to clear. As they left the clinic together, Emma bundled in Jack's coat asleep against his shoulder. Clara opened the car door and slid in beside them without asking. Jack looked over. "You don't have to stay." She smiled softly. "I know." He turned the key. The engine started. For once, Jack wasn't running away from something. He was driving toward it. And in the rear-view mirror, for the first time in a very long while, he didn't see a man who had lost everything. He saw a father. A voice. A witness to what mattered most. 1 month later, the Del Paso Farmers Market looked both the same and entirely different. The tarps were still mismatched. The cobblestones still rattled under delivery carts. The air still smelled of cinnamon, fresh cilantro, and yesterday's rain. But now there were signs in English and Spanish. A community bulletin board had gone up near the entrance, and next to the tamale stand a table staffed by high school volunteers helped vendors fill out new city-compliant forms on paper or tablet their choice. Jack stood beside a newly planted fig tree near the corner entrance. He had helped dig the hole for it last week with Manuel and Rosa, who joked that if the fruit ever came in too sweet, they'd blame Jack's overly tender soil. A simple wooden sign stood beside it for those who made space for others. The project wasn't finished, not even close, but it was alive. The redevelopment had been paused, reworked from the ground up with community voices at the center. Jack had a seat at that table now officially, and for the first time in years he had let people see him. All of him. He heard the sound of sneakers slapping stone before he saw her. Emma ran through the market like a breeze with legs ponytail bouncing, clutching a folded sheet of paper in her hands. "Dad," she called breathlessly. "Guess what?" He caught her with one arm steadying her mid-flight. "What's up? My school's letting me read my story at the district assembly next week." "The whole district, Dad." They picked mine from the 5th grade entries. Jack blinked. "You entered something." Emma grinned. "It's called The Language of My Dad." He swallowed. "Oh, I wrote about you," she added, growing shy for just a moment. "And the market, and how words don't always come from mouths. Sometimes they come from what people do." Jack bent down and pulled her into a hug. "You keep talking like that, I might have to retire early. I already told Miss Carter you'd be there. Of course I will." Later that afternoon, Jack and Clara stood outside the market office going over the last set of vendor training requests. They had started hosting bi-weekly classes in the community center, Basic English for Market Vendors, How to Price Without Undercutting Yourself. Telling Your Story in Business. Jack taught the language ones himself. Clara still handled logistics funding and board-level discussions, but more and more she showed up at the market in jeans and rolled sleeves, helping vendors organize or just walking with Emma between stalls. Today, she wore her hair pulled back in a low ponytail, gold earrings catching the sunlight. Jack couldn't help but notice how easily she fit now, not just into the scene, but into his rhythm. "Big day tomorrow," she said, scanning the paper. "City Planning Committee's final vote." Jack nodded. "They'll approve it." "You sound confident." "Not confident," he said. "Certain." Clara tucked the paper into her folder, then looked at him. "You did this, you know." "No," Jack said. "We did this." She smiled, but there was something deeper behind her expression today, something quietly vulnerable. "Jack," she said after a pause, "there's something I've been meaning to ask." He turned to her, suddenly alert. She hesitated. "What are you afraid of now?" He blinked. "Now, yes, because everything you feared before the boardrooms, the attention, the responsibility, you faced it, and then some. So, what's left?" Jack looked out over the market, the kids handing out flyers, the elderly woman counting change with trembling hands, the young man helping his mother build her first product display. "I guess," he said slowly, "I'm afraid of what comes after healing. When you stop surviving and actually have to let life in again." Clara's eyes softened. "That's fair." He looked at her. "And you?" She exhaled. "I'm afraid that I'll forget, that the board meetings and projections will pull me back into the world where community is just a checkbox." Jack shook his head. "I don't think you could ever forget this place now." "I don't want to," she whispered, "because this is the first time in a very long time I've felt like me." He reached for her hand. She let him. It wasn't grand. It wasn't theatrical. Just real. Two people, both scarred and softened by life, quietly choosing not to walk alone anymore. That weekend, the city committee voted unanimously to approve the revised Community Integrated Redevelopment Plan. Jack didn't cry. Clara did. They celebrated with the market community under string lights and picnic tables, sharing food and stories and music. Emma read her piece aloud to a crowd of cheering vendors who held up cell phones like proud aunts and uncles. Manuel offered free oranges to everyone. Rosa brought extra chairs for strangers. The fig tree at the corner bloomed early. No one expected it, but no one questioned it either. Later that evening, as the lights dimmed and the vendors packed up, Clara and Jack stood alone near the entrance. "I almost didn't come back that first day," she said. "I almost didn't speak." "But you did," she said. "You kept showing up." He looked at her. "So did you." They stood in silence. Then Jack said softly, "Clara, this market, it's not the only thing you helped rebuild." She met his gaze. "You either." And they smiled, not the smile of beginnings or endings, but of becoming. Of two people who had weathered the storm, built something together, and discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing isn't the voice that shouts, it's the one that listens, that stays, and that loves quietly but fiercely, right where it matters most. The morning sun spilled across the rooftops like honey warm and patient as if it had nowhere else to be, but there, lingering over the Del Paso farmers' market. It was Saturday again. Jack Moreno stood beneath the fig tree, his hand resting lightly on the new cedar sign posted beside it. The wood was smooth, freshly sealed, the engraved words standing bold in dark ink. "Kindness is a language everyone understands." It had been Emma's idea to use that phrase. Jack hadn't argued. In fact, the first time he saw it, something had shifted in him, like the ground had finally settled beneath his feet. He heard familiar voices nearby, vendors greeting early customers, children laughing over kettle corn, the buzz of a small guitar being tuned near the fountain. And then her voice. "You're here early." He turned. Clara walked toward him, hair still damp from a morning shower, a paper bag in one hand and 2 coffees balanced carefully in the other. "I beat Rosa," he said, feigning pride. "She won't forgive me." "She might forgive you," Clara replied, passing him one of the cups. "But not Emma. She said you promised to help her pick out her presentation outfit today." Jack sipped. "Ah, so I'm on wardrobe duty." Clara's grin softened. "She trusts your taste." Jack chuckled. "That makes one of you." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the morning come alive. Behind them, Emma's booth was already half set up, a simple display board with her school story printed in large letters, copies folded and stacked like little books. Above it, a sign hand-lettered in purple marker read, "My Dad's Language, The Power of Showing Up." People paused to read it. Some smiled, some nodded. A few even wiped tears. Jack still couldn't believe it. Not the award, not the community response, but the truth in those words, how a child could see something in him that had taken a lifetime to recognize in himself. Later that morning, the storytelling stage reopened for the first time since the city's redevelopment approval. The microphone had been replaced, the lighting repaired, and a new banner stretched across the backdrop, Voices of the Market, where every story matters. Emma was the first to speak. She wore a navy blue dress and red sneakers and held her note cards like sacred scripture. Her voice was clear, confident, steady. "My name is Emma Moreno," she began. "And this is the story of my dad. He doesn't wear a cape. He doesn't fly or shoot lasers, but he does something cooler. He helps people feel like they belong." The crowd quieted, leaning in. She spoke of language, not just Spanish or English, but kindness gestures, consistency. How her father had used all of those to help people who didn't always have a voice. She ended with this, "My dad says that when you show up for people, it doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it's quiet, but it always echoes." The audience stood, clapped, cheered. Jack clapped too, his eyes shimmering. Clara slipped her hand into his. That evening, the market closed under a soft sky the color of lavender and smoke. Jack and Clara walked together along the outer path past the fig tree, past the vendor booths, now packed away, past the children's chalk drawings on the pavement that spelled "Gracias" and "Thank you" side by side. They paused near the gate where a new installation had gone up, a collage of photos, stories, and handwritten notes from community members. In the center was a snapshot of Jack on stage, microphone in hand, eyes, calm voice, mid-sentence. Someone had written beneath it in cursive, "The man who reminded us that silence is not the absence of voice, but the presence of choice." Jack stared at it for a long time. Clara nudged his arm. "You okay?" He nodded slowly, just remembering how far away this all used to feel. Clara smiled, and now he turned to her. "Now it feels like home." They stood quietly. Then Clara said, "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Does it involve coffee or city zoning regulations?" She laughed. "No, it involves a question." He waited. She took a breath. "What would you think about building something together?" He blinked. "The market?" "No," she said gently. "I mean, life. You, me, Emma." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took her hand, brought it to his lips, and kissed it softly. "Then I think I'd be a fool not to." Clara smiled wide and whole. "Good, because I already bought a second toothbrush." A week later, the local paper ran a headline, "From Quiet Strength to Lasting Legacy, the Market, the Man, and the Movement." But the headline didn't matter to Jack, nor did the feature photos or the city proclamation or the plaque being prepared for unveiling. What mattered was this one evening, Emma crawled into his lap with a blanket, her hair damp from her bath, and whispered, "I'm glad you used your voice." He wrapped his arms around her. "Me too, sweetheart." "Do you think it's true?" she asked sleepily. "That kindness echoes." Jack looked out the window where the lights from the market still glowed in the distance, warm and steady. "I think it never really stops," he said. "It just keeps going, person to person, like a story that knows how to find the right ears." She yawned. "Then I'm going to be kind forever." He smiled. "You already are." And in the hush that followed, the house breathed softly with the peace of things once broken, now made whole. A man who had stopped speaking had found his voice. A woman who had forgotten her roots had rediscovered them. And a child who believed in both had rewritten what legacy could look like. No banners, no noise, just presence, truth, and love. And in that they built something stronger than any structure. They built home. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story moved you the most? Drop a comment below and let's connect. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more meaningful tales just like this one. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the power of small miracles.